Be sure you download the note card that goes along with this sermon, and you can print it out and you can follow along, fill it in as you follow the sermon. If you like this sermon, want to see more like this, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, also hit the bell notification so you'll be notified when other new content is added to this site. We try to add sermons as often as we can. We'll try to add some Bible question and answers that we've done before in the past, other things we may be adding to this. If you have questions, leave them in the comments below. If you'd like to follow us on social media, there are links to our social media accounts in the video description below. Now, let's jump into the sermon.
If you have studied with us in our other studies, you will hear us talk about this before. 17 time periods that the Bible has been broken into. We have the period before the flood, roughly 4004 BC to 2350 BC. That 4004, Bishop Ushery had came up with that number, and nowadays we hear 4112, 4114, somewhere in that area, time of the beginning. Some have thought spring around April, time of the beginning of creation there. And then up to the flood, 2350, kind of a date fixed for the flood. Scattering of the people. You recall Genesis chapter 10, Tower of Babel, 2348, 1920 BC. Period of the Patriarchs, 1920 BC to 1700 BC. The Exodus that we just got finished with not long ago here at the Spring Hill Church of Christ, anywhere from 1700 to 1490 all the way down to 1442 BC I have seen, which will put an approximate date of where we're getting ready with this study to study 1490 roughly to 1450 BC, give or take 10 or 20 years there. After this, we come into Joshua and we talk about the conquest up to around 1400 BC, then the period of the Judges. The United Kingdom, 1050 roughly to 930, the end of Solomon's reign, 930, pretty well everyone agrees to that date. Coming to the right side, the divided kingdom under Solomon up to 720, when the northern tribes go into Assyrian captivity, 720, 721 BC. Judah then lasts from 720 to 589. The first captivity, the first deportation of captives into the Babylonian captivity period, lasting 70 years from 589 to roughly 539 BC. And then the return, roughly 539 to 430 BC, years of silence, 430 to 5 BC, accounting for the time period of off of the chronology of Bishop Ushery, James Ushery. The life of Christ, 5 BC, we believe, lasting up to 28, as high, I've seen it go as high as 30, 33 AD. History of the early church, 28, if we fix that date, to 48 AD, and then letters to the churches going from 48 AD. If you take the early date for the book of Revelation, then it might be 97 AD or somewhere thereabout. So there's a timeline that we can kind of gauge a little bit. I'll have other timelines I'll add to this. Once I get them done, I'll add those in later lessons, so be watching for those. This is a study. If you haven't studied the book of Leviticus or Exodus yet, go back and look at those studies. But we're going to look in this series of lessons at the book of Numbers, and I believe this is going to be roughly 10 lessons, 10 lessons, give or take there, covering the book of Numbers. By way of introduction, Numbers is the history of Israel 40 years in the wilderness. The name comes from the name of the census, numbering of the people. There were two taken, chapter 1 and chapter 26. Both, we're going to find out, were taken for military reasons. The author of the book of Numbers is considered to be Moses, and there's a lot of internal and external evidence to that, and I would get to have you turn over to Numbers 33, over in Numbers 33, chapter 33 there in the book of Numbers, and we want to look at chapter 2, Numbers 33, chapter 2. Now, maybe you're like me and you say that enough, you'll eventually get there. It says, now Moses wrote down the starting points of the journeys at the command of the Lord, and these are their journeys according to their starting points. So that kind of fixes it for us of Moses being the writer. Covers some 39 years, and I have a little different date than what we had on the other chart there. Here I have 1444 BC. The idea of the coming out of Egypt, they believe anywhere from 1440, 1450 to 1405 BC. Israel as a nation was in its infancy at this point. They were still encamped at Sinai for 13 months roughly after the Exodus from Egypt. Actually, not 13 months, 11 months. It only took them 2 months roughly to get to Mount Sinai, 1 or 2 months. Now, if you note the date, and we pointed this out when we were starting Leviticus, and so I want to point this out to you now, these two different dates. First of all, look at Exodus 40, verse 17. It came to pass in the first month of the second year. Now, this is coming from, the second year being dated from the Passover in Egypt to this point, so it'd be 2 years. First day of the month that the tabernacle was raised. Now, if we come over to where we're starting today, in the book of Numbers, Numbers chapter 11, or Numbers chapter 1, I'll get that right in a minute, get tongue-tied here. Numbers chapter 1 and verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of meeting on the first day, second month. So we're talking about roughly a month later from the book of Exodus. Again, they were at Mount Sinai roughly 13 months there at Mount Sinai. So the Levitical instructions were given in the month between the two, as we've covered. So I don't want to chew my cabbage again on that, but that's what we covered in the book of Leviticus. Their history in the wilderness, the census taken twice, and there's our dates covered. And then we get right here, this chart should help illustrate what I was just talking about. Exodus 40 verse 17 once again tells us, and I'll go by this, second year, first month. Numbers chapter 1 verse 1 helps looking at this chart. You kind of see they're at Mount Sinai according to this chart. We have Leviticus up there, what we're talking about, the writing here. Numbers chapter 1 verse 1, we learn that it's on the first day, second month. So we got a month period there, that dotted line, a 1 month period. Total time, 11 months, 20 days. So that should cover that. So we are at the second year, second month. That date's right. I got the first date wrong for some reason. But there we have the beginning of the book of Numbers. So that's what we wanted to point out to you there to get us started. We are, depending on whether you want to go to the traditional view, which this map shows, Mount Sinai being in the Sinai Peninsula, Jebel Musa, Mount of Moses, or the alternate view I'll show you in a minute. But I want you to notice wilderness of Sinai up through to Kadesh Barnea. And that's in the wilderness of Paran. Now, I do have these wilderness over here, but notice now the alternate route. So it depends on what route you take, and I think there's more evidence now for the alternate route than there is for the traditional. When you look at that book, The Gold of Exodus, there's all kinds of evidence for this. But notice this, Mount Sinai, you'll notice the Arabian Sea there, that it's on the right side, land of Midian. And then there's Ezon Geber, I know I butchered that name real good. And then up to Kadesh Barnea is what we have. So there's kind of where they're getting to. It's not going to take them long. Now, if you look at that, get ahead of ourselves a little bit here. Had the children of Israel listened to Joshua and Caleb, it would have been less than a month they'd have been in Canaan. But of course, we're going to learn they didn't do that. Now, here's an overview I just got finished up with this chart of the book of Numbers. And they're written around 1400 BC. I kind of fixed that time period. People will argue one way or the other. Covering roughly 1450 to 1400 BC, Moses being the author. And we are at number 1 division, you want to call it. I have it actually in 3 divisions. You'll see on the Bible Project chart coming up next. Israel prepares to leave Mount Sinai. Now, with a group of 2 million people, you are not just going to get up and just start moving. All kinds of preparation. I remember my mom, before we would go from Ohio to Arkansas, there'd be all kinds of preparation be done for the trip. Make sure we had enough. Make sure things were put in the right spot where she could get to them or one of us could get to them. Same way now we go on trip. My wife does a lot of preparing, does a lot of do this, do that. Get ready. Can you imagine 2 million people? That's what the first 10 chapters of Numbers is about. We're going to see preparing to leave Mount Sinai. Then we're going to look at Israel moving to Kadesh Barnea, chapters 10 through 12. And the complaining. Then the rebellion, the not listening to the spies that were sent out. Numbers 13 through 20. We're going to find the journey from Kadesh to Moab. Aaron dies at Mount Hor. Shortly after, Miriam dies at Kadesh, and Israel wins its first battles. The fiery serpent, where the medical symbol comes from. Those who are bitten become sick, and many die. Moses holds up the bronze snake in the wilderness as a foreshadowing of Christ on the cross. John 3 talks about that. And all who look at the serpent are healed. Israel anticipates taking the promised land. Now you got the new generation at the end of this period. Remember, the old generation dies in the wilderness. Israel now, the new generation, anticipates taking the promised land while in Moab. We have the story of Balaam and his donkey and Balak, the king of Moab, asking Balaam to curse the Israelites, and of course he couldn't do it. A reminiscence of Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 through 3, that what God promised Abram at that point. Numbers 33 through 36, Moses writes a review of Israel's journey from Egypt to Canaan. Laws of inheritance are revealed and outlined so that some women can own property. Now there's that chart. Some may like it, some may not, but did the best we could on it. Then, Numbers from the Bible Project, I like their drawings. I would love to have the video where I could go through it with the video that they have. I just don't have that available, but I'll try to get as close to that as I can. Starts out, Numbers, rebellion in the wilderness. And we think of that as a theme. I've got another theme for you in a minute. God brings judgment and shows mercy at the same time. Judgment on those who rebel, mercy on the new generation. What we have seen thus far in this study, we have seen the exodus of Israel. We've seen the covenant given at Mount Sinai, the breaking of the covenant. Remember the golden calf. And then the tabernacle and priests and everything set up in the book of Leviticus. And now we are ready, at the point of being ready to go into the wilderness, to head to the promised land. Oh, how that everybody must have been looking forward to that. And so what we're going to find as we get into our study, chapter 1, we need to know how many people we have. We're going to have a census. There's other things taking place that take place in chapter 1 through 4, and we'll talk about those as we go. Now, here's an old drawing of the same thing, drawn on a whiteboard. Numbers, we have one column, God, Israel's journey from Mount Sinai, getting ready. The left column, getting ready, as we've talked about, chapter 1 through 10, verse 10. God provides shelter when Israel's on the move, center of the camp when Israel stops. He's a protector and guide. And we see that little cloud there representing the mercy seat where God's presence is. Moses is to number the people of Israel, sets up camp formation. There's the complaints. There's where they reach Paran, and they're on their way to Kadesh Barnea. And there's the events. We'll talk about those events as we go through this study. On the other side of that, heading to the plains of Moab, they complain again. Aaron and Miriam die. Moses will die too. Remember the striking the rock instead of speaking to it. We'll study that incident here in the book of Numbers. God judges, heals, and fights. And then the plain of Moab, the new census taken. Phinehas, Aaron's grandson, zealous for God, we'll talk about. Balaam tries to get Israel to curse God 7 times, but God only allows him to pronounce blessings. That's an interesting story. Almost there, they receive more laws. Joshua named Moses' successor. 2.5 tribes settle outside of the land of Canaan, the promised land, and it's okay. So there's what we have there. And of course, we're going to begin in this left part of the screen at Mount Sinai, getting ready to leave. So there's kind of a background of some of the charts you're going to see as we go, pointing out some of these things that we're going to use in this study. But how about a theme to this study? The theme, consequence of disbelief in God and disobedience to God. There's always consequences for our actions. One thing we learn as a child, isn't it? And here in illustrated form is what I'll show you here in a minute. In written form, the layout of the book of Numbers. I'll probably wind up redoing this because it's all pixelated here on this screen, but we'll eventually get this redone over in the Excel, and we'll bring it back in. So let's look at a preview of the book. How's this book broken down? That's what we always want to know, and I think it's always good to have a good outline in our head and help us find things later as we want to find some particular verse or story. Starts out the old generation. We're dealing with the old generation in chapters 1 through 14. And we'll get into that. We're going to start right there at chapter 1, dealing with the old generation. Then we have a transitional period. The old generation is still alive. Remember, because of rebellion and disobedience, they are all going to fall in the wilderness, including Moses. And so while that's going on, we have a transition from the old generation to the new generation. At the beginning of chapter 21 through the end of the book, we now have the new generation at Moab at the doorway to Canaan. Chapters 21 through 36, and we know what happens right after that. Joshua will take Moses' place, lead the people. We'll get that study in Deuteronomy chapter 1 about the advice God gives Joshua in leading the people in place of a man that has been the leader for some 80 years of the people of Israel. And now he's got to fill, as they say, big shoes. And like George Jones says, who's going to fill those shoes? Joshua is, with God's help, will do a good job filling those shoes. Part 1, the preparation of the old generation to inherit the promised land. Now, we know they would, because it's not that big a trip from Mount Sinai. Roughly 3 months will get you from Mount Sinai into Canaan land. But it's going to take them 40 years to do it. God starts out with organizing Israel to get ready for this trip. And that's what we're going to look at today, these 4 chapters. The organization. Then we will be looking at, where yet? There it is, sanctification of Israel. Sanctification means setting apart for God's service. How do we get people ready to be a servant of God? That's what we have in part 1. We're going to look at today. Part 2, the failure of the old generation to inherit the promised land. The failure of Israel en route to Kadesh Barnea. There's where they don't listen to the 2 spies that give the good report. They listen to the 10. The climatic failure is what we call that of Israel at Kadesh Barnea. Then there's the failure of Israel in the wilderness. Remember all the complaining once again. We'll talk about the failure of Israel en route to Moab. 20 verse 1 through 25 verse 18. And by this time, the majority of the people are going to be the new generation. Part 3, we acknowledge that, the preparation of the new generation to inherit the promised land. The old generation failed due to their rebellion and disobedience. Again, we talk about the reorganization of Israel. The old generation is gone. Now we have to reorganize because we have the new generation. We're going to get into the Deuteronomy, the re-giving, the second giving of the law, because the new generation has to understand the laws of God. Regulations of the offerings and vows are given. 28:1 through 30:16. That was already given in Leviticus, but that was the old generation, remember. Now we have it given again to the new generation. And then we have a beginning of the conquest and division of Israel. And that's how this study is going to go down. That's how you break down the book of Numbers. Now, with that in mind, let's look at Numbers chapter 1 through the end of chapter 4 in this study of the book of Numbers that we start today. Numbers chapter 1. We have chapters 1 through 4, but chapter 1 here, we have a numbering of the people. Again, this numbering is for military purposes. So you begin to look. Numbers chapter 1, verse 1, now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of meeting on the first day of the second month, we've already talked about, in the second year, after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel by their families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male individually. Then he says, verse 2, from 20 years old and above, all who are able to go to war. There's the purpose of this census. It says, you and Aaron shall number them by their armies. And with you there shall be a man from every tribe, each one the head of his family. Now he goes through and he gives us the numbers represented on the sheet. And I look down, seeing where he starts. These are the names of the men who shall stand before you. From Reuben, from Ether, the son of Cedar, and he gives the names who are going to, and they're kind of shown up there in cartoon fashion, I guess you'd say, on this chart, this whiteboard, from a whiteboard a long time ago. So Reuben, we have the number, 46,500. Simeon, 59,300. Judah, 74,600. Issachar, 54,400. Zebulon, 57,400. Ephraim, 40,500. Benjamin, 35,400. Dan, 62,700. Asher, 41,500. Gad, 45,650, Naphtali 53,400, Manasseh 32,300. Now that's the numbering we have. As we look at all, and we go down through here, now the numbering of the children of Judah is given last, and we've already read that. 74,600. We go down through toward the end there, and we learn about the Levites and what their job is going to be in regard to this. Notice verse 49 of chapter 1. I want you to notice this passage. Says the Levites were not numbered among them by their father's tribe, for the Lord had spoken to Moses, saying, only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, nor take a census of them according to the children of Israel. But you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of testimony, over all its furnishings, over all the things that belong to it. They shall carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings. They shall attend to it and camp around the tabernacle. And when the tabernacle is to go forward, the Levites shall take it down. And when the tabernacle is set up, the Levites shall set it up. The outsider who comes near shall be put to death. No outsider outside the Levites shall mess with the tabernacle. Children of Israel shall pitch their tents, every one by his own camp, every one by his own standard, according to their names, their armies, But the Levites shall camp around the tabernacle of the testimony, that's inside, that there may be no wrath on the congregation of the children of Israel, and the Levites shall keep charge of the tabernacle of testimony. Then the children of Israel did according to all that the Lord commanded Moses, so they did. So when you get through all this census, totaling all the males able to go to war, 603,550 males above the age of 20. Someone has interpolated that out with women and children, would estimate 2 to 3 million people at this time. And again, this was a fulfilling of the promise God made to Abraham, Genesis chapter 12, and in verse 2, I invite you to turn over there and look at that. In verse 2, I will make you a great nation. Now, 3 million people, that is a great nation for this time period. He said, I will bless you and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. There it is. We already saw that this census was for military purpose. Only true Israelites could fight Israel's battle. And it might suggest none are to serve today unless the spiritual pedigree is in order. Again, Levites are not included in the general census. They were chosen for special service pertaining to the tabernacle. Numbers chapter 2. Numbers chapter 2, part of this organization of the people, chapters 1 through chapter 2, verse 34, the distribution of the tribes. The 2 to 3 million people were organized around the tabernacle with military precision. We have the illustration. We have the tabernacle. Inside the tent of meeting, inside the tabernacle area, we have Levites inside there, kind of drawn there. Another chart to show you a little better. Here we have them. The dark blue are the families of the Levites. The north is, well, the east side, you have Moses and the priests. The west side, you have Gershon, the part of the tribe of the Levites. Merah is one of the families of the Levites, was toward the north. And in Kohath, we're going to learn, that tribe is the tribe that handles the taking down of the tabernacle. And there's different jobs we'll learn about. Seeing that in a better picture, here is a picture I found. I'll turn it on its side like the other picture was so you get an idea. There it is. You see the tents of Moses and Aaron. Then you see coming directly from that, you have Judah, you might say in a pretty good position there. Those on the right hand, we have there. And Moses and Aaron have their tents, like their office, I guess you would say. And then how all the camps are around. That's what Numbers chapter 2 explains to us, but we explain it there to you in pictorial form. I think a lot of times a picture is worth 1,000 words, because all that you read in the book of Numbers chapter 2 is right there on those charts. So let's go to chapter 3. Chapter 3, the numbering of the Levite males. The placing of the Levites, we might call that. And we learn in chapter 3. says, now those are the records of Aaron and Moses when the Lord spoke with Moses on Mount Sinai. These are the names of the sons of Aaron: Nadab, the firstborn, and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. That was their names. Now, of course, we learned what happened to two of them in Leviticus chapter 10. These are the names of the sons of Aaron, the anointed priests, whom he consecrated to minister as priests. Nadab and Abihu, notice verse 4, had died before the Lord when they offered profane fire before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai. We've already studied that, and I would invite you to go back to the study of the book of Leviticus for that discussion, and you can learn about it there, how they had died. So Eleazar and Ithamar ministered as priests under the oversight of Aaron their father. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, bring the tribe of Levi near and present them before Aaron the priest, that they may serve him. They shall attend to his needs and the needs of the whole congregation before the tabernacle meeting to do this work of the tabernacle. They shall attend to the furnishings of the tabernacle meeting, to the needs of the children of Israel, to do the work of the tabernacle. Now, notice verse 12. Now behold, I myself have taken the Levites from the children of Israel instead of every firstborn male. Now, before it was the firstborn male was to be dedicated out of each household to the Lord. Now the Lord says, I'll take the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi will be substituted for the firstborn, what they had. Instead of every firstborn, he opens a womb among the children of Israel. Therefore the Levites shall be mine, because all the firstborn are mine. On the first day that I struck all the children in the land, firstborn in the land of Egypt, I sanctified to myself the firstborn in Israel, both man and beast. They shall be mine. I am the Lord. So now he says, number the children of Levi by their fathers' households, by their families. You shall number every male from a month old. Here's who you're going to number in the Levites. From a month old up. And there we have the numbering of the three families, and you'll notice their position that we have. We have the Gershonites, the family names, the two families there. Libanites and Shimeites, 7,500. Levites total were 22,000. Their duty was to take care of the tabernacle and tent covering, the screen of the doorway, hanging of the court screen for the doorway and of the court. The Kohathites, the families of the Kohathites, they were to the south. The Amramites, don't confuse that with the Amalekites. Isharites, the Hebronites, the Azelites, 8,600. Their duties are going to be the ark, carrying of the ark, the table, lampstand, altars, utensils of the sanctuary, and the screen. That would be between the Holy of Holies and the holy place, I believe. The Meratites families were the Mahlites and the Mushites. They were to the north. Their duties was the frame of the tabernacle, the bars, the pillars, the sockets, and the equipment. Now the east, those who were to camp before the tabernacle were Moses and Aaron and Aaron's sons. Specific place that we have, as we saw in chapter 2. Here it is talked about all in chapter 3. And you can learn about the Levites' dedication instead of the firstborn, verses 40 of chapter 3, all the way to 51, where it says, Moses gave their redemption money to Aaron and his sons according to the word of the Lord, as the Lord commanded. People could buy their children back, redeem them back. Of the 200, there was 273 of the firstborn of the children of Israel who are more than the number of the Levites. Said you'll take 5 shekels for each one individually. You shall take them in the currency of the shekel of the sanctuary and the shekel of 20 gerahs. You shall give the money with which the excess number of them is redeemed to Aaron and his sons. So Aaron takes the money from those who were over and above those who were redeemed by the Levites. From the firstborn children of Israel, he took the money, 1,365 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. Moses gave the money to Aaron and his sons according to the word of the Lord. So there's chapter 3. All this is getting ready to march, to be on their way through the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh Barnea, getting ready for that trip. Chapter 4. What about the organization of the priests? The distribution of their duties that we just saw, what was going to happen. We kind of got a little ahead of ourselves there, but we've looked at these duties a few minutes ago. We mentioned them because the chart showed them. And their service had to do with the erection of the tabernacle, its transportation, its related service, such as the tending and driving of animals for sacrifices and preparing of incense. A big job. The responsibility of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, his job was going to be the oil, the incense, and the grain offering. All the tabernacle and all that is in it with the sanctuary and furnishings. We have, you see over here on the left in the fellow's hands. So when they finished covering the holy objects, Aaron and his sons, when they got ready to leave, they would cover the holy objects, not the Kohathites. Aaron and his sons would. The sons of Kohath, the Kohathites, they'll come carry them so that they will not touch the holy objects and die, verse 15 tells us. Remember what happened to him, trying to steady the ark. He died. That wasn't the way you do it. Verse 16, all the tabernacle and all its furnishings in chapter 4 here. We see verse 16, their job is to cover. That's what we were told in chapter 4, verse 16. The appointed duty of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, is the oil for the light, sweet incense, the daily grain of the tabernacle of all is in it, with the sanctuary and the furnishings. And so that was what they were to do. Verse 28 now, we drop over to verse 28, and we see the duties of the son of Gershon, and we see his duties is told, the service in the tent of meeting, and their duty shall be under the direction of Ithamar, the son of Aaron, the priest. He's going to be their supervisor, you would say, area manager, you might say, supervisor. supervise these duties as depicted there. Verse 33. This is the service of the families of Merari, as all their service for the tabernacle of meeting under the hand of Ithamar, the son of Aaron, the priest. And we see you're going to number them from 30 years old and above, even to 50 years old. You shall number them, everyone who enters the service, to do the work of the tabernacle of meeting. And this is what they must carry as all their service for the tabernacle of meeting, the boards of the tabernacle, its bars, its pillars, its sockets. All the pillars around the court with the sockets, pegs, cords, with all their furnishings and all their service, you shall assign to each man by name the items he must carry. So they're going to carry the same items, all done in precision, just like a military. Your job in the military, radio repair in the military. We had men that were over certain particular radio equipment, control tower equipment. You would be assigned. And that man, if that went down, that was his responsibility. Yeah, you might have went out to it on standby, but when it was brought in, it was generally turned over to the man and the group of men that were responsible for that piece of equipment. So there is Numbers chapter 4, the end. Now, that's as far as we are going to cover in this lesson. And as we're going to look next lesson, we're going to look at Numbers chapter 5 through chapter 10. Verse 10 will get us through this first part, preparing to move, sanctification of Israel. That's what we're going to look at as we continue our study in the book of Numbers. Now, if you found this video helpful and want to learn more, be sure to download our free Bible correspondence course. You can find the link for it in the description, either below, to the right, to above, wherever they put the description nowadays. We here at the Spring Hill Church of Christ want to help you with your growth in the knowledge of God's Word. Remember, we're in it for the likes and subs, so be sure to subscribe. So thanks for watching or listening, however you're doing, wherever you're listening from, Facebook or Rumble, or even our website, or 10 other audio sites, audio podcast sites. So in the meantime, in between time, see you next time. Cheerio. With that, Bob's your uncle.